Hi, I'm Vonne. Welcome to the Surviving Suicide, Finding Life Again channel. This is a brand new channel that I'm starting on YouTube. I do have other work on YouTube related to my book Divine Healing, Transforming Pain into Personal Power, which is a book all about my experience losing my daughter to suicide in 2005. And a metaphysical approach to understanding grief and loss and our place in the world, our contract, why things happen to us, that sort of thing. As well as a practice for healing grief, which was given to me as a gift from the angels way back in 2005. So we're 14 years into this grief journey for me. And that has been a wonderful sort of healing. Some people say it must have been very cathartic for you to write that book, which took me 5 years and was first published in 2011, and the most recent edition was published in the US last fall. And I would say, no, it wasn't very cathartic. What it really was an attempt when my world was thrown upside down when my 22-year-old daughter, Janaea, killed herself. And I was really struggling with a lot of the same issues that every other parent who loses their child to suicide, even probably a spouse, a sibling, a parent, a grandparent, a colleague, whoever it is, whatever that relationship you've had with the individual who has died by suicide, most of us tend to struggle. We take on blame. We think that if we had only done this or we had only done that, they wouldn't have died. The list goes on. And so in my book, Divine Healing, I really tackled a lot of those issues, along with the fact that I was extremely frustrated that when I was thrown into grief, this was a world I knew nothing about. I hadn't lost anybody except grandparents, when I was a teenager. I had, still my parents were living. This was just a shock, and it threw our whole family into turmoil. So everything from dealing with the immediate aftermath of going to the funeral home, choosing a casket, choosing the type of burial, choosing the memorial, getting the guest list together for it, closing my daughter's bank account. She was living on her own, so making all those arrangements that we have to make when a physical life has ended is an incredibly shocking thing to do when you have no prior experience with it. Add that to losing your child, no matter what the cause, but in our case as a suicide. And let me assure you, there are thousands of suicides in Canada every year, many of them children and youth, and globally hundreds of thousands, and it's an increasing problem. So while my interests, my personal interests, of course, lie with child suicide, any work I do, anything I put out on YouTube, I have a video series called Trauma in Grief, and I will put the link to that channel, which is called Living Meditations, down below, in the description down below this video, because that's, again, another area. Trauma, PTSD, and grief is another area I work in. I am healing from it. I do have post-traumatic stress disorder. So there are many, many issues I work in that I want to bring attention to help other people who are suffering trauma, living with PTSD, have lost their kid to suicide, are floundering in grief, whether it's long-term grief, new grief. The intention of this video is to share what I've experienced, what I've learned, just basically so I don't feel so alone, and really so that others don't feel alone, and maybe bring a voice to this. So getting back to this channel, which is again brand new, and I decided to call it Surviving Suicide, Finding Life Again, because I realized as I'm working on my next publication, which is a book dedicated to child suicide and basically for parents to consider many of the emotions and feelings that immediately impact us upon losing our child, and then linger for years. And I am writing this book in the hope that, again, like this video channel, it will help people understand the grief process a little bit more, and not saying that your grief is the same as my grief, but what I have learned after 14 years is that grief is grief, circumstances are different. So it's tackling a lot of the emotions, a lot of the feelings, a lot of the uncertainty, the doubts, the questioning, the frustrations, the illnesses we go through, the vulnerability that we experience, the weakness we experience. And I guess my take on it, and the reason I'm starting this 14 years later, is because I've had so many things that have felt challenging in my life from the minute I learned of Janae's suicide to today, where I'm still working things out. I have the good fortune to have a great medical insurance plan. I am retired, quote, retired from the so-called working world, but I am self-employed. I work as a writer. I blog. I do this. So I am completely dedicated to my service and passion work, which I have found is related to this field of grief. And I'm very, very passionate about what I do, simply because I know that in Western culture, we shy away from wanting to hear about somebody's loss. Ooh, it's uncomfortable, and especially if it's child loss. Wow, please don't go there. People really don't want to hear about other people's problems. And though I have found over the many years when I've engaged in conversation with individuals and they are curious, they don't want it to happen to them, losing a child, but they're curious about what that's like. I have also run into dozens of people who experienced as a child their sibling dying, not from suicide generally, but from some other cause, and it destroyed their families. And I'm so curious about people who have grown up, they're in their 50s, 60s now, and I'm so curious about looking back, what did that do to them as an individual? How did it shape their adult life? And in almost every case of anyone I've ever talked to, whether they're a personal friend of mine or in casual conversation, because I tend to talk to a lot of people and they tend to confide in me, their world was turned upside down. Losing a sibling, especially at a young age, their parents never recovered from it, and largely for most of them it was never talked about. So what that has done to them is basically incredibly sad, and I think it is a lost opportunity for delving into so many things about pain and healing and many, many things spiritually related that I'm also obviously very interested in, because I've been a practitioner of spirituality for about 37 years now, 38 years. And so that naturally played into a good portion of my work and my own healing. However, that and that alone is really no different than someone having faith in God alone and Christianity, and having all of their foundation of whatever it is the individual believed in, what you believed in. If you're watching this and you've lost your child or someone else you really loved, to suicide, a sibling, as I say, a parent, a grandparent, a really good friend, it can really, really crush everything you ever believed in, and you are left with this blank slate of not knowing what to do, where to turn, how to pick up the pieces and carry on. And speaking of picking up the pieces and carrying on, I've also met a lot of people who have done that, both in my work as a practitioner of angel therapy, and as just a person very interested in hearing about other people's stories. And I'm generally pretty good at spotting someone who's just picked up and carried on and didn't want to delve into their pain because it was really just too painful. And I get it, because I did the same thing. I basically committed to doing an awful lot of writing and readings for people and carrying on in my personal life and dealing with problem after problem after problem in my personal relationship, my marriage, my family, my extended family. I was a mess, but most people wouldn't have known that, of course, because I hid it really well from others. But I did reach a point in September of 2015, and we're now at September 2019, where I crashed and I found myself on disability from a work situation, and I no longer could afford to avoid the physically painful part of my grief. So since 2015, fall of 2015, I've gone on a journey which lasted 3 years, that I focused only on the physical part of it, and working with therapists and in different types of counseling, individual, relationship, and considering a lot of what traditional therapy has to say in treating grief. Although I wasn't there for grief therapy, I was there for relationship and fixing other types of problems, managing anxiety, managing stress, how to be happy, how to fix my relationship, how to build more strength and character in the normal world. And after 3 years, so maybe in 2018, I'd say like late last year, I decided that I'd come full circle. And I realized that in my personal life, I could not any longer push aside the spiritual beliefs I had. I didn't push them aside, but I had left them at bay, so I could just feel in a human body what the pain of losing my child to suicide was like. And it wasn't a pretty picture. It really wasn't. So when I committed to returning to a blended approach, so in other words, honoring the physical part of this journey, because I can't get away from being a physical human being, and I have people around me who don't share the same spiritual interests, and therefore for me to just want to live in that world is going to completely cut them out of my life. So I'm having to find a balance and honor both of the experiences. I'm here as a spiritual being having a human experience, but I'm also here as a human being having a spiritual experience. And within that, everything that I feel, that I struggle with, that I conquer, I pat myself on the back and say, good on you, mate, and let's do this again, or let's do this a different way, or this is working, let's share it. But in the overall larger picture, the intention I've always held and continue to hold is that I would like to see changes in Western culture, and I'm from Canada, so I don't think I'm limiting it to North America. I don't think that I'm limiting it to just the Western world, but I don't have experience enough in the Eastern world to really understand their approach to death. I don't live in Europe, so I really don't know the approach they have to death in Europe. I do know the approach they have in North America, and it is, we don't want to talk about it. We really don't want to talk about your child you lost. Let's get the funeral done. Let's get all the business out of the way, okay? And let's, for that first week or two or maybe month, we're going to get all those casseroles, and we're going to get all the people coming over, and they're going to send the sympathy cards, and they're maybe going to pick up the phone, but ooh, nowadays it's more like, you know, let's do our condolences on Facebook, and then they fade into the woodwork. And that's where my work comes in, and the work of anybody else whose focus is on grief, understanding it better in Western culture, so that we can help grievers, myself included, through the healing journey in a much more impacting way. So one of the things I want to do in this particular video series is contribute to it on a regular basis as I either learn things that I want to share. That's going to be the bulk of it. Maybe as I struggle with things. But what I have found in my particular journey in grief, dealing with not just the death of my child, but the suicide of my child, which, if you really just stop for a moment and contemplate what it really means to have not just an individual decide to end their life, but your very own living, breathing child, no matter the age. But as an aside, youth suicide is generally considered up to about age 25, 26 for most countries. And then there's children suicide that, believe it or not, kids actually do kill themselves as young as 10. But stopping for a moment and just really thinking about, my child chose by whatever method to end their life, whether it was a gunshot, boom, seconds, or other methods that took minutes. That is huge to contemplate. And that is something that I can say as a parent, I have trouble with years later, and I'm sure most parents do. One of the things is vivid in my mind, the first week after Janaea died, and my sister came out from Vancouver, and she was with us for 2 weeks, and other family members came out, and everybody had a role to play in, you know, cleaning up Janaea's apartment, calling the funeral home, making the memorial arrangements, keeping me sane, etc., etc. My husband sane. We had each other, but unfortunately we grew apart for many years and back together, and I'll do videos on that too. But I was desperate for support, and I knew I was not going to get through that experience without talking and being around other people that had gone through it as well. So my sister made some calls, and she found the Compassionate Friends support group for us, which we attended the first available meeting, which was in August, because Janaea died July 26th. Everything was shut down for the summer. So ahead of waiting for that meeting, which was going to be, you know, the third Tuesday, and I had, you know, a few weeks to go, my sister ended up finding someone from another support group that happened to be a volunteer, and a woman who had lost her son to suicide 15 years earlier. And so my husband and I went to meet her at this location, where she was working. And, you know, we sat and talked with her, and to tell you the truth, I don't even remember what she said to us. I have no clue what she said to us. I just know I felt that was the first living, breathing other human I'd ever been around that had a child that had killed themselves, or themselves, I guess I should say. And I did feel a bit of a connection, but I really felt more of a connection when we attended the Compassionate Friends. And I was in this very, very small circle of people, maybe 15 of us, that all were there for the same reason. We were looking for support because our child, no matter the age, had died. But I will say many of the children that had died, children were in their 20s. So a lot of the parents from young adults were in attendance at that group for the year that I did attend it. Here I sit, it's no irony, 14 years later, and I'm thinking about that lady that extended her kindness to us, to let us know that we weren't alone and that, one day things would get better. And if I recall anything, I think it was something about, this was going to be a new normal for us. And I read a lot of books, as many as I could find. So when I say a lot, okay, I read a lot of books, many on spirituality to keep me, centered and grounded, and a handful on grief. And a couple of those by fathers who had lost their children largely to illness. And a lot of them talked, in fact, I think all of them talked about new normal. And I have resisted that from day one of becoming a bereaved parent, because there's nothing normal at all about losing your child or going through the grief process to try and cope with the aftermath of your kid's death. So I haven't got a term for it. I haven't coined a term for it. I don't think there is a term for it. I just know for me personally, life, and for my husband as well, that life has had its ups, it's had its downs. For him, it's been a little bit of a constant, probably his way of trying to be that staunch support. Many couples don't make it. Majority of them actually split up after losing a child. We've opted to stay together, and we just realized about a week ago, we think the reason we've stayed together is because neither of us has anyone else that can really share our experience. And even though we've shared our experience, it's been very, very different for both of us, largely because my daughter was his stepchild. And it's both been a blessing and a curse in the sense that we can't share the same pain, but the blessing is that we do have a son together. And I can't tell you how grateful we both are that he is alive and well today. I'm not sure that he's, doing as great as he should be, because he's never really dealt, in my opinion, with his sister's death. But in terms of just normalcy, or I should say normalcy, for him, he's got a career, we're close with each other, we see each other regularly, and he's doing as well as possibly he can be doing. So I don't really have to worry about him. And I'm not really sure which type of grief would have been worse for us, one where we'd lost a biological child together, or the one that we've gone through and we're going through, where much of our struggle comes from the fact that the pain is just so different for us, because he wasn't my daughter's biological father. And there is a difference losing a biological child and one where he wasn't there at her birth. He wasn't there the first several years of her life. We met and married, when she was 7, married when she was 8. And he doesn't remember. He doesn't know anything at all about those early formative years. So I don't deny him the grief, not at all. What I'm saying is the experience as a mom and as her mom from day one is very different from what my husband has experienced. At any rate, I'm going to be tackling a lot of issues in this series as we move along. And I really, for this one, no matter who sees this video, if you see it and it's not your cup of tea and you want to share it, tell somebody else about it, and you go, you know what, this would be perfect because so-and-so just lost their child. Whatever. Share. Leave comments. Engage in a conversation. I'll put up my website link so that if anyone wants to email me questions or comments or get in touch with me for anything else, we can engage that way as well. Again, the reminder for this is this series, Surviving Suicide, Finding Life Again, is just sharing my story in the hope that we can share other stories. And I think it would be awesome if one day it evolves into something where I'm actually sitting here not alone, but I'm sitting here with other people talking about what's getting them through their grief, right? This would be amazing for me. On that note, I'm going to end this rather lengthy introduction to this video series. I want to end with saying a little bit more about finding life again, is that this is something I'm just able to do now. Some people might find life a year after their child dies. Some people, might never find life again. They might just be going on feeling completely dead inside and not really dealing with the grief. There's all kinds of things that people are going through and how they're dealing or not dealing with the loss of their child. So what I found for me is that I have always wanted, from the earliest days of my grief, to find some element of peace, to find a way to be at peace with my child choosing to not be on this planet, and me choosing to be okay with my life as having had this experience. So here I am. This is why we're doing the video, because I'm learning an awful lot about myself. I'm learning a lot about grief. I work with a therapist, still do work with information that comes to me through psychologists, psychiatrists. I recently did a webinar on PTSD, and while it wasn't specific at all to grief, I was able to tailor it to what trauma and PTSD is like in grief, hence the Trauma in Grief video series. So we're going to keep going with this, again with the intention of bringing a voice to those of us that need it, who are vulnerable, who are never going to return to who we were before we lost our child. And we're trying to find a way back into the world in a way that's going to, bring us some element of joy to the end of our days. That's what this is about. I decided maybe a month ago, I choose life. I choose to be happy. I choose to be joyful. I choose not to rob my loved ones of the extent of who I can be for them. And in order to be that person, I am the one that has to find life again in a way that brings me all those things I'm looking for. Well, I'm sitting in Bali right now. My husband and I are on an amazing journey traveling through Asia, Indonesia. We're going to be going to Greece. I'm going to be posting a few more videos, I sure hope, from some of these other locations and sharing, really just to show you it's not about where we are or what we have or who we have in our life. More, it's to understand that the pain follows us wherever we go, however we choose to live, whatever we choose to live in, whatever we own, whatever we discard, doesn't matter. At the bottom of it is our pain, our journey to find joy in whatever ways we can. And something I'm going to leave you with is a video I watched a few months ago. And it was a gentleman who many years ago, I think around 20, lost his wife and infant son in a car accident that he was responsible for. He was driving, they died. He had another son who survived. And you know, even though he got married again, he adopted children with his second wife, he was living a full life with this new person, additional children, even he was still struggling. He had been an athlete and was disabled from the accident, so he became this different person, and, you know, admitted that it wasn't easy. And one of the tips that he gave for finding joy again and trying to not stay in that place of joy, but at least grabbing onto it when you can, was just finding certain moments in the day, what he called divine moments, certain moments that you can grab onto and just go, this is life. This is what I'm looking for. This is what makes me tick. This is what makes me feel good. Maybe not complete, but this is what makes me feel content, even if it's for a moment. And maybe as time goes on, the moments will become a little bit longer. The things that bring me, you, contentment might be a little more throughout the day, to the point that maybe one day I will feel a completeness to myself again. You will feel a completeness to yourself again. Because one thing I don't want is to die, and on my deathbed, should I be lucky enough to have a death where I can have, you know, some contemplation and go, wow, did I ever waste a lot of years being in pain? Did I ever rob my living loved ones of that part of myself that I could have been giving them? Here I am, finding life again. Talk to you on the next episode. Take care.